become subdued, so I'll take advantage of that lull. Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Mike Franz. I teach American politics here at Bowdoin College, and I have the honor tonight of introducing our speaker, Professor James Gimpel from the University of Maryland, who has been on the faculty since 1992 and earned his PhD from the University of Chicago. And as part of his career, over the course of his career, he's done many things, including for 8 years was the editor of a peer-reviewed political science journal called American Politics Research, and worked for 2 years on Capitol Hill with the United States Senate. I'm not quite sure which of those two things, being the editor of a journal or working for the U.S. Senate, caused him more heartburn, but I'm sure there was some in any case. He studies public opinion, campaigns and elections, political behavior, and immigration policy and politics. And among his many good books is Patchwork Nation. One of his areas of research is political networks and the geographic distribution of voters that have sorted out through residential mobility. And he's been at the forefront of the effort to apply geographic analysis tools to the study of politics and policy. So he's here tonight to speak on big data, the promise and the hype. And I hope you can join me in welcoming him to Bowdoin College.
The title's slightly different than advertised, but the content doesn't vary too much from what was originally planned and what was advertised on the posters that I've seen around. Thank you for inviting me. First time to Maine. I like what I see. Cold weather doesn't faze me. I grew up in a cold weather climate out in the plains, so this is like being back home in a way, but with moose. I'm excited about big data, but with caveats, and that's how you can explain or encapsulate, my position on the whole big data revolution. And when I titled the project, the presentation, Promise and Hype, I think it reflects the question that nationwide people in various institutes and institutions of higher learning are asking themselves. What does big data promise us? What can it deliver? And what is hype or gloss? I don't think that the people here at Bowdoin College should think they're the only ones that are confused about this, okay, or are asking this question. I don't, you think, well, we're a liberal arts college and we don't really do data here and we don't know the answer to this question. No, folks, absolutely not. People at Maryland are asking this question, people at Michigan, people at Caltech, people at Berkeley, Emory, Florida State, every type of institution is confused about this question. How much is hype, and just where is the promise? So it's not isolated to here at all. You're not at all unique. And my students come at this topic with the very same questions. So to start off with, we might ask a couple of questions about big data and address this confusion about it. First of all, there's a question of what is big. And this is an area of confusion because this is a very fast-moving target. Because big depends very much on the hardware capabilities, really, that are at your disposal at any given time. So, when I started, for example, in some of my political behavior research, working with voter files in 2002, a voter file the size of the Maine voter file, about 800,000 rows, would be big data, okay? And the California voter file with about 15 million rows would be considered really big data, okay? And 10 years later, that's routine, okay? Any desktop that is equipped, maybe in the $2,000 range, can handle data that size, without any problem at all. Just what is big is changing very quickly. And, even now there are computer scientists at Carnegie Mellon that are working on a laptop that can crunch 1 billion cases in a matter of minutes. Okay, so the frontiers on what is big are just being beaten back all the time. I think the second question is, well, what is so new about it? And this goes, I think, particularly to the analytic tools that we bring to our big data collections. And quite honestly, a lot of the tools that we're bringing to big data analysis aren't really that new. A regression with cross-validation, not new. The various techniques that are being used for dimension reduction, not new. Okay, maybe these techniques applied to very large data sets are new, okay, but these are the same tools that social scientists and people in business and engineering, and the hard sciences have been using for years. There's some new accents methodologically on predictive analytics, and some of that is new, okay, but quite a bit of the analysis being done on big data is simply not new. And a Bowdoin graduate who had taken a couple of statistics classes in 1995 would have been pretty decently equipped to learn what he needed to learn to do the big data analytics that are being done out there. So it's so what is big is changing a lot. What is new about it? A few things related to prediction, but don't be intimidated, okay? A lot of the big data analytics are knockoffs of things that, you've been teaching here for years, okay? And that other institutions have had as part of their stats curriculum for years. One thing I'd like to point out is the important distinction between what I call big conventional data and big unstructured data. This is a very important distinction to clear your head up, okay, about the kinds of things that are being done under the guise of big data. So much of what I work with on a daily basis is really nothing more than big conventional data in the sense that it comes to me in columns and rows, just like a spreadsheet, okay? It's organized in columns and rows, just like data has been organized for years. The only thing that's different about it is maybe I got 100,000 cases now, whereas 20 years ago I'd have had 1,500, okay? Possibly, I have millions of cases. If I have the entire national voter file, it's 210 million cases, okay? So I put all the states together, 210 million cases, okay? I wouldn't say that's routine, but it's manageable. Okay, and it's very conventional data in the sense that it comes to me in ordinary columns and rows, the way data has always been organized. Okay, again, not intimidating, not new. Okay, now big unstructured data is new, pretty new, because this is the kind of data that you're harvesting or collecting off of the web, okay, usually from code that you program, all right, in Python or R, okay? And then you have to invest time after you've taken it off the web in organizing it in columns and rows and cleaning it. And there's a lot of sort of pre-processing that goes into this type of big data before it gets into this format, all right? And, this is a very different kind of thing, okay, than taking data from a source that is already set up for you, all right? Very important distinction. Under the category of big conventional data, in the social sciences, probably the best examples of big conventional data would be in psychology, where we are recording images from functional magnetic resonance imaging. In geography, we have satellite images. This is a satellite image of the of Brunswick, not New Brunswick, of the Brunswick area, Brunswick, Maine. Bowdoin's in here somewhere. And, so psychologists and geographers for a while now have been storing their data in huge storage silos because just a morning's worth of observations will fill up many gigabytes of storage. So just a morning's worth of satellite images is, just tremendously huge in terms of the storage it requires. And so these data sets are enormous, and doing analysis on them, we're talking, billions of cases, usually takes some kind of supercomputing capacity. It's not something that you can do on your desktop. Not that I know of, anyway. In the other social sciences, the ones I'm more familiar with, economics, political science, sociology, the big conventional data that we work with are often coming these days from administrative records, okay? And these administrative records might be in the area of health. It could be health records. They could be records on students. They could be voters or maybe contribution files from donors. I'm working with some big data on police and fire calls from a jurisdiction in Maryland. Every single 911 call that's come in from 1996 to 2015. Some detail about the nature of the call. So these are, maybe 1 million cases and larger. And again, seem pretty well manageable. There might be large-scale surveys out there. Survey data is very popular with sociology and political science in particular. But again, people are manipulating things like these recent Annenberg polls, with 100,000 cases, 120,000 cases. It's not a big deal. Also, pooled collections of past surveys, you're beginning to see people take from, like, say, the Roper Center, all of the Gallup polls from 1940, to 1970, okay? And, pool them all together, and they'll have, maybe a million cases of responses in all of those polls. And they'll use those to study, say, trends in party identification or the transformation of politics in the South, okay, from the old South to the new, or subjects of that kind. And so again, social scientists are pretty routinely manipulating these days data sets of that size. They're just not a big deal. I think that these will yield new insights. It's exciting that these are getting done, but these are certainly not things for anyone in this room to be, intimidated about. On the big unstructured data side, these are cases where maybe the intimidation factor is a little bit larger here because the data are both big and messy, okay? And so you've got things like unformatted text in the form of Twitter tweets, okay? And, or, maybe the data are digital in origin. They're from Facebook or from blog posts. You're scanning blog posts for keywords, or, you're scanning the entire text of Wikipedia. And from there, you then have to figure out just what you want in the text, get that information into columns and rows, and there's this very large phase of coding and cleaning, before you can even get to analysis. All right, so that's a very different kind of thing than, working with conventional data that's just very sizable. Think about Twitter, for example. 6,000 Twitter tweets per second, 500 million per day, 30 billion pieces of content shared on Facebook each month, okay? And Wikipedia containing 5 million articles and 37 million web pages. That's the English language version of Wikipedia, by the way. Okay, so, we're talking about lots of storage required also, and, pretty decent computing capacity. And I haven't talked about, some of the messy big data that businesses like to work with in terms of clicks on their web pages or transactions, from many franchisees, fast food restaurants, this sort of thing. So Wikipedia data collection is kind of interesting. One of the projects I've been working on is I'm kind of interested in these high school Wikipedia pages that list notable alumni. Okay, and so what I decided to do was go through all of the Wikipedia pages from every high school in the country, okay, and scan the notable alumni section of the page. Notice that the page, here's this one's from Brunswick High, and I know you can't read it very well, but I'll leave a copy of the presentation behind, if you want to look more closely. I've highlighted this section of the page. This is the information that I want, okay? And yet, the problem with Wikipedia is, even though the page seems kind of structured, there's still variation from page to page, okay, in how the data are laid out, okay? And so sometimes scanning for notable alumni doesn't get you anything because it won't be notable alumni, it'll just be alumni, okay? Or, somebody else will come along and set up their Wikipedia page for their high school, and, it might not be notable alumni, it might be like, well-known people, kind of thing like that. So that's incredibly frustrating. That when you go from page to page, not only, is the position, of course, on the page different, but the things that you're trying to program your code to look for are going to be different too. So that means, you have to program it for, several different versions of the page as they might encounter them. Okay, and anyway, here's a blow-up of, the famous people that were listed on the Brunswick page. And I'm interested in this. I originally got interested in this because I was wondering to what extent the people on the notable alumni section of the high school page were involved in politics, okay? Were political office holders, okay? Or if, as far as people were concerned who tune into Wikipedia and set up these pages, politicians really don't count as notable people, right? It's entirely possible, right, that politicians don't count as notable alumni. Or maybe they do in some places, but they don't in others. That's very interesting, right, from a geographic standpoint, kind of a cultural geography. So anyway, I went through, we went through, here was the workflow. It's always good to map your workflow. Here it was. Okay, so we had to program Python to call up the pages. Okay, out of about 37,000 public and private schools, high schools in the country, and some are combined middle and high, right? But out of about 37,000 total, there are around 12,000 that have Wikipedia pages. Okay, so there are quite a few high schools in Maine and other states that don't have Wikipedia pages at all. By the way, that itself is interesting variation, okay? But it's pretty much what you'd expect. Rural schools, very small schools, tend not to have Wikipedia pages. Brand new schools, schools that are newly built, tend not to have Wikipedia pages. So, for the most part, the variation is kind of along the lines you predict. But that meant that we wound up scanning 12,000 Wikipedia pages, scanning again for notable alumni or alumni. And, the scanning process took a long time with quite a few stops and starts. All right, and that's because, as I said, even though Wikipedia tries to keep these pages in a fairly standard format, there was still enough variation, okay, that you had to program and reprogram in order to do the searching. Eventually, we did wound up with data deposited in rough column and row form, all right? But then there was this massive editing, cleaning, and recoding process. And, that took me probably 3 to 4 months to work through. And this was typical. What I wanted was a school name, a notable person, okay, and what the person was known for, because that's sort of the way the data are laid out in the common Wikipedia page. But as you can see, there were times I'd get, Mercy High School, this is out by San Jose, and you'd get this gibberish, right, and a blank, all right, and, or here, same one, okay, with a bunch of code mixed in with other things, errors, obviously. This is the only record, right, in this particular section of the data that came out right. Notre Dame High School, Olivia de Havilland is the notable person. I'm sure you've heard of her, right? Amazing, famous actress from years gone by, okay, and what she's known for. All right, so I highlight this to show you just what a mess this can wind up being, okay? And, it's not at all, like getting your data presented to you in the way that conventional data comes, all neatly organized in a package with a bow and columns and rows, okay? No, sorry. This is work, all right? And especially when you've got not just 12,000 Wikipedia pages, but all the entries, okay? And, for every famous person, you have an entry. And naturally, there are some high schools that, the list is very long, particularly when you get into the Southern California high schools, proximate to the entertainment industry, right? Many, many, many famous people, are on those lists, okay? Anyway, that's an example, workflow with messy data. We are getting there, okay? We're making progress on this project, but along the way, there have been many errors, and it's been an incredible amount of work. So what I would say on the analysis side is that many times you have a lot more data preparation and processing and recoding involved with the unstructured data, right? You might, in this case, have to, tag the observations with geocodes so you can place them on the map, okay? This is the, the New York City metropolitan area. I think in this particular study, the red was sort of positive tweets about the places that people lived, and the blue was sort of negative tweets, okay? And of course, one of the problems with mapping data from Twitter is that on the face of it, this is just showing density, okay? Just population density, all right? So you've got to do much more to wring meaning out of this data, than just put the frequency count up there, because all that just shows you is, gee, lots of people live in Manhattan, and hello, I think we knew that already, okay? There's also the importance of, with big data, classification, dimension reduction, prediction. So partly what we're wanting to do is reduce the level of detail. I have, in these police calls, I have them identified, these 911 calls, by the day, hour, month, year. Do I really need hourly and daily observations? Well, maybe for some purposes. But for me to really digest this data on the police calls, I need to aggregate it, okay? I need to reduce the level of detail, at least initially. I need to take swaths of say, month-long periods, okay, and block the data into month-long periods, maybe investigate the trends in certain kinds of police calls, on a month-to-month basis across the years that I have it, okay? Someone else might say, well, maybe we want to do it by week. Okay, well, whatever. The question is, sometimes the detail is overwhelming, and the only way to make sense of it is to make some decisions about, how to reduce it and digest it. Just another example of some research that's being done, with big data. I talked about this in the class this afternoon. One of the things that's popular in campaigns is political microtargeting. They've been working on this since about 2003, 2004. Largely, what it does is combine consumer data sources with the voter file from your state to try to predict things like receptivity to persuasive messages. Who on the voter file might be responsive or persuaded by a message, say about gun control, or about inequality. In the case of the Sanders campaign, maybe they want to find people who might be particularly annoyed, by the extremes of wealth and poverty or something. And so a vendor, might come to them and say, hey, we can take your voter file or your voter files. In the case of a presidential campaign, you're working with many of them. And we can add, 800 columns of data, onto your voter file. And we're going to charge you, as large amount of money for that. And, the naive campaign manager will say, ooh, that sounds really great. I think the problem, of course, is out of those 800 columns of data, how many of those items merged onto the file are really going to be of value, and probably only a small fraction of them. The answer is probably only a small fraction are going to be of value. And the vendor probably doesn't have much of an incentive to tell you that, right? Because they want to make the sale. They want to sell you the whole package. And 800 sounds a lot more impressive than 40, okay? So anyway, here's another example, though. And this, by the way, is very conventional data, right? Because you've got, basically somebody's collected spreadsheet of consumer information here, and we're just going to merge that onto, the voter file, which is nothing but a huge spreadsheet of voter records. But my point is that, quite a lot of valuable information is available for free just on the voter file, which you can get from your state board of elections or your secretary of state. Or if you wanted one for this county, you could go to probably the county board of elections or the county clerk's office for free, right? And there's a lot of valuable information available just for free. Another example in campaigning is the effort to couple big data with randomized controlled trials, field experiments, where we maybe take a voter file and segment it into control group and maybe a couple of treatment conditions. Okay, we make sure that these are balanced. Okay, in other words, that they're equivalent. And we try to take our big data and generate new knowledge from it, right? Because on some of these things like persuasion, persuasive messaging in campaigns, and what works to get small donors to contribute, we don't have a lot of social scientific knowledge. It's kind of embarrassing when you take stock of how little knowledge social science has generated on some of these subjects. We don't know that much about persuasion or how persuasion works. We don't know that much about what motivates campaign donors, small donors or big donors, okay? And so, there's a need to take the big data, pair it, with some kind of field experiment so that we can come away with real knowledge about things that are effective and not effective in advertising or in the area of campaign contributions. All right, a couple more things and then I'm going to stop. One thing I emphasized also today, and I emphasize particularly because I'm coming to very prestigious liberal arts college, where you've always been proud, of your traditions, And that is the need for domain knowledge. This emphasis on data acquisition and preparation and analysis, that can come at some cost to actual understanding. And we've had this discussion on my campus too. If we add a 4-course sequence, on big data analysis, what do we subtract? Okay, what are we taking away, from the psychology program or the political science program, econ, sociology? I think that we can push some things out that maybe we don't want to push out. There's a need for both domain knowledge as well as good writing, right? And I've run into quite a few people who are really adept at programming the data harvesting and the data coding, but they can't write about the findings, and they're not very confident they can even interpret the findings, right? So, they run the analysis tools and they see the little clusters appear in the plot, but they're not quite sure what they mean, right? So, I guess what I'm saying is there are some traditions in the liberal arts curriculum that are of tremendous value and that every institution should hang on to, and not get carried away with training liberal arts graduates to program in Python. Okay, a little exposure, yeah, but there are things that you're good at that companies and government agencies and research firms and universities, really need. And those are things that you've always done well. I've made sure that I've communicated these points to my dean as well, because I'm in the Arts and Sciences College. So conclusions, moving target, right? Moving target. What was big 10 years ago is really easily manageable today. Something in the size of 19 million cases, 13 million cases is I think the Texas voter file. It's a piece of cake, okay? 10 years ago, when I would set a routine running, I'd have to come back in the morning to see it finish, okay? Now it comes out in a few minutes. By the way, I have, my mentors and, people who are really old school, who, in order to just get a bivariate cross tabulation back in the 1960s, okay, just a one variable by one variable cross tabulation, they'd have to set the mainframe computer running all night and come back in the morning just to get their one variable, their one by one table, one variable by one variable table, right? So, big data in 1965, 1964 was 1,100 cases. Imagine, right? 1,100 cases. That's nothing, right? There's no way you could publish an article with 1,100 cases in a major social science journal nowadays, okay? So, all right. I think there's some big challenges here in the new digital data. What it can tell us, is there sufficient information there? These are all things that computer scientists and social scientists are going to have to grapple with in the future, and are grappling with now. So I have a few maps of some work I've done, but I'm going to stop. I won't go into the appendix. I'll just sort of stop right there and ask if there are questions, and maybe there's an opportunity to show one of these appendix figures. I'll show it. But.
So you talked about getting knowledge out of big data analytics. Can you give some example from your work, maybe?
Knowledge of big data analytics. Well, I think that the best work that I've done. Well, I guess I'll show you some maps here then. But I guess the best work that I've done, I think, would be work where I have used big data along with a randomized controlled trial, okay, to test something, say about advertising. Okay, so for example, we might, to test campaign advertising, we might randomize media markets, okay, a state, like Maine or Texas or California or Virginia is going to be cut up into media markets. And what we might do is randomize the media markets, okay, and show advertising in some of them, but not in others, and then make treatment control comparisons about the effectiveness of the advertising. So there you're using big data. Exposure to the advertising is the treatment, or in the case of control, no exposure. And the idea is then to go in and do maybe a big data survey before and a big data survey after, and look for movement. So in one big data randomized controlled trial on advertising that I worked on with Don Green at Yale, that was published in the American Political Science Review. One of the important discoveries from that, from a campaign advertising standpoint, is that any positive effect, persuasive effect of campaign advertising disappeared completely within a week of the advertising going dark. Okay, and that was a pretty remarkable finding because it suggested that people's memory for campaign ads is very short. And that if a campaign wants to sustain a persuasive effect, it needs to stay up. Stay up, in other words, stay on the air. Okay, or people, or the decay in memory or recollection is going to be so fast, it will be as if you were not on the air at all. And that was the case. I mean, this was a real advertising effort we were testing. The campaign spent $1 million on advertising. And within a week of the advertising going off the air, it was as if they hadn't spent any money at all. It's like they took $1 million and burned it. Okay, and that's really interesting because there's a, enduring question in political science. Do campaigns matter? Do campaigns matter? And, you're naively inclined to say, oh, well, of course they matter. There's all this frenzy of activity, and look how hard all these guys are working, Sanders and Clinton and Kasich and the rest. All right? But when we go to look for effects, it's really hard to find campaign effects. And so you have to wonder, gee, if these guys shut down their campaigns tomorrow, and we didn't see them the rest of the year until November, would it really change the outcome? We'd all be relieved, no doubt, right? But, would it really change the outcome? It might not.
Yeah, in that case, you had the great benefit of being able to work with the campaigns to
Yeah,
randomize the
that's true.
treatment.
That's true.
And so actually, the question I had about, not later, more of a question, but sort of the challenge of working with big data that you can theoretically just grab for free, or big data that you need to get from somebody or get permission to use. So if you just want to grab something from the internet, that's one thing, but if you actually wanted to get a large, even a conventional data file that someone wasn't willing to give you, that poses its own challenges.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, sometimes you have to develop a relationship with the vendor or owner of the data, and that can ease the way. In the case of a campaign, getting on the inside. Although, as I said, on the Democratic side, the Analyst Institute down in Washington has been set up, to do some of this randomized control testing on campaign outreach efforts with big data and to help you to secure the cooperation of campaigns. The Republicans don't really have anything like that on their side, which is to their detriment. But there are other cases where, for example, Greg Huber and Neil Malhotra persuaded OkCupid to open some of their data files so that, they could study the matchmaking process. One idea they had was to see if people made matches on the basis of political characteristics. How important was the political information in the profile to making a match. If it was there, people will definitely use it. That was kind of the upshot of their paper. Now, what they didn't show, and this was a little unsatisfying, was that if that information wasn't there, people would try to figure it out, right? That politics was important enough as a matchmaking criteria that if someone didn't list it, maybe they'd try to infer it some way. And I think that would be a more interesting finding. But at the very least, their paper showed that if people have political information in their profile, it will be used, by prospective dates. So if you put that in your Facebook profile or Instagram or wherever, Tinder, I guess, is the big thing. People will definitely evaluate you accordingly. They'll use it. So, that's why it's important to watch what you put up there. Yeah.
So I know Professor Franz talks about this a lot, but I'm wondering if you could speak to the challenges of using data that people report about themselves, i.e. their beliefs, their political ideology.
Yeah.
Polling versus hard data collected by an agency or Facebook or whatever it may be.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Self-reports are subject to exaggeration. I think the classic example is sex. That there's a lot of exaggeration and lying about sexual behavior. And sociologists have known about that for a long time and, have tried to find ways around it. A little closer to political science, we've known for a long time that people don't self-report their racial attitudes. They soft pedal the extent to which they're hostile, to minorities, to ethnic minorities. So there's a lot of that, I think, self-report bias, especially on sensitive questions, sensitive areas. It's problematic to ask people their health history. People don't want to lay that out to someone they don't know, right? So that's why, healthcare researchers prefer using actual medical records, administrative records, as opposed to surveys. So all of those areas, it's absolutely true. You have to watch out for the self-reports. Of course, if you're also familiar in political science, people will exaggerate or lie about their turnout, right? They'll, to the extent of 15% or so, over-reporting. They'll say that they turned out in the election when they really didn't. So there's a lot of that. There's some things that, a survey needs to be validated in some way, or, maybe you need to, deploy the survey information, but use a supplementary source, use more than one source, of information to bear on the subject as a way of tackling that. I think there are some ways with both sex and race that sociologists and other social scientists and psychologists have come up with clever ways of unobtrusively approaching the subject and eliciting a response that's more honest, that gets to the core of people's actual experience, without putting them on the spot. Right. So, but those are all definitely problems and issues in social science research. And that's, why we need to take different approaches to the subject. And that's why, an anthropologist's case history, and case studies, those are important too. I have students who come in to my GIS classes, and they're anthropologists, and they kind of come at social science differently, right, from an in-depth sort of case-by-case approach, and I think that's needed too. We need that kind of social science as well. We absolutely do. Yeah.
We talked about in my campaign data class how the 2012 Obama campaign used big data way more than, astronomically more than the Republicans do, and even currently.
Yes.
But Republicans win on local and state level much more. Do you think big data is only effective on a larger scale?
That's a good question. Well, once again, I think, probably some of the hype plays in here. Yes, President Obama and the Obama campaign used big data effectively. Was it entirely responsible for their win? Oh, of course not. My sense is that, big data and campaigns in general, it can have a marginal impact. Okay, but make a 15-point difference? No, that's just ridiculous. I mean, that's not going to make that much of a difference. Okay, but a marginal difference is plausible. But this is where, as I said, you have to bring a certain amount of suspicion and skepticism to the journalists who write about the Obama effort. Because there's a lot of obviously the journalists need to make this sound exciting and super successful and the holy grail because they want to sell their piece, right? And so I've seen these works, and in some cases my own work has been hyped, by the likes of Sasha Eisenberg. And I'm like reading this stuff and I'm saying, man, this guy, doesn't realize just how modest my contribution was, right? I mentioned in the book about 2004 by Mark Halperin, and the guy like totally exaggerates, my contribution. I think that's the problem with a lot of journalism on this topic, is that, the contribution of these big data types is marginal. It can make the difference between victory and defeat, yeah, especially in a close race, but it's not everything. And I think that, that's why, the Republicans can still run competitively and do well, being so ham-fisted about it, and being so stupid about it. Because it's not everything, all right? It can play a marginal role. And a lot of the things that the big data analysts are doing probably aren't contributing anything, okay? But in all that, that large amount of activity that's going on in the campaign, there are a few things that are probably working pretty well. And we need, I think, more randomized controlled trials to sort out, what's really working of all their efforts and what isn't. Okay, so again, I'm excited about big data, but with caveats. We need to test. And one of the things I mentioned to the students earlier today is campaigns are sometimes reluctant to test because number one, they're not sure the information is going to come back in time for it to be actionable. And number two, sometimes these campaign managers get a lot of pushback from their vendors, right? Because, when you say you want to test, what you're really saying is, I want to put your direct mail vendor to the test. I want to, put the phone bank guy to the test. I want to put, your robocall firm to the test. Okay, and the vendors, they're threatened by that. The last thing they want is accountability. Okay, they absolutely have no incentive to have their work evaluated by you. Okay, and so, the campaign manager is going to get an earful from a lot of the vendors saying, no, we don't want these guys around. This is like what is it, what do they call it in the police department? The internal affairs unit? They're hated, right? Everybody hates the internal affairs unit. Well, that's, sort of what these political scientists are to campaigns. They're the auditors, checking up, on the vendors. Well, I think a good campaign manager is going to recognize that vendors lie and have an incentive to lie. And that a good campaign manager will bring in some people to do these kinds of tests. And, the Obama campaign and the Democrats are on the right track. They're definitely on the right track. I still think they have some of these same kinds of, issues with their vendors too. But they should, keep doing it. Eventually the Republicans will figure it out. Who knows when? And they need to lose 5 more elections. I don't know. I I mean, losing, helps, I think, people get the religion. So, yeah.
Earlier you mentioned that the scenario where say a vendor approaches a campaign manager with 800 columns of consumer data. Judging from your experience, which of those columns might be most useful for campaigns? I mean, if they did, all 800, that's a huge data dump, and it's easy to imagine how many folks just get lost in that much information. But I would imagine that there are certain key kind of items, certain key, preferences that citizens have in when they're shopping and so on and so forth that really kind of stand out for campaign managers. What might those be?
So, an amazing amount of the data that are provided don't tell you that much more than the income of the person. So, quite a bit of the data that market research companies collect is all about purchasing power and purchasing inclination, consumption preferences. And, when you see that, someone has a Nordstrom card and, another person doesn't, or maybe a Nordstrom card and a Saks card and a Macy's card and another person doesn't, often, what you're really picking up is just a difference in income. And so, so many of the columns are just, proxies or duplicates for the income of the person that you can pick up free from going to the voter file and looking at the address and zip code and seeing what the home value is for free. Okay, so I think that's the first thing, is that a lot of the stuff that is available is income related. The stuff that isn't, or where you might get some insight sort of within income strata, would be on things like race, and things that might go to kind of lifestyle preferences, how outdoorsy a person is, whether a person enjoys sports and sporting events, and it might be useful to reach them, on a sports channel on cable as opposed to, the Lifetime channel. Whether a person might be a little more liberal from the standpoint of, maybe openness and acceptance of diversity. So, some things like that.
Are there Prius Republicans?
Yeah, I think that's some of the.
Yes.
Oh,
not personally, but I know.
But they're self-hating.
That's a good point. What the point that he's making is that there's an ecosensitivity dimension that you can tease out, from looking at like automobile ownership as well as, purchases of certain consumer products related to the environment. It's pretty well known that just mapping where Whole Foods locations are, gives you a pretty good clue as to where high-income Democratic neighborhoods prevail or are prominent. So you just need to map, the home goods locations and it'll get a clue, because that's how they select where to locate. So yeah, I think there are some some things like that. One of the things I suggested earlier today was that if there's a theory that could link the consumer preference information to the political behavior, that would help. Okay, and that one area that might tie the two together is in social psychology of personality. Because in the social psychology of personality, you have a dimension called openness to diversity, okay, which also predicts liberal political values and predicts certain consumer preferences and travel preferences and interest in ethnic food and this kind of thing. You also have a dimension called conscientiousness, which predicts conservative political behavior and thinking on the political side, but shows up in certain behavioral residue over on the consumption side as well. Okay, you have several other dimensions of personality which have behavioral residue on the consumption side, and also could be informative of political behavior. So it may well be that what links these two data sources into coherence is this other thing underlying them both. And I just suggested that to the students. It's not definitive, but it's an area that's being explored. So, insight. Yeah.
For using big data for prediction,
Yeah.
how big a problem is it that the data they analyzed is static, and voters move, and people subscribe to radio stations that are not in the area they live in? In other words, the population is much more flexible than a data set that's static might indicate.
We made a lot of progress. I've worked on this myself some, in tracking movers, and we can now get a snapshot of the main voter file 4 or 5 times a year, and it's fascinating because you can see how people move and re-register. Of course, a lot of people move and don't re-register for quite a while. They kind of drop out of the electorate for a while when they move, because you do have to re-register once you move. So we're getting better at doing that. So it's not entirely static. We can also get a sense for, when people move, are they kind of doing this sorting where, they're looking, if they're Republican leaning to move into a more GOP oriented environment. If they're Democrats, are they looking to locate to a more Democratic environment? And we can track that by, looking at the movers and where they relocate. So that's kind of neat. So there's some neat things being done there. There are always going to be things omitted. If we have one piece of information, any political scientist anywhere can tell you this, if we have one piece of information we most covet, it's just good old-fashioned party ID, party registration. And we have about 20 states that don't register people by party, and those states are really hard to work with. Campaigns hate those states, right? It's so much easier, when you have that party registration as your guide. Not that it's accurate all the time either, because people do change that, but it's the best single piece of information we have for understanding political preference. And so, which of these 800 columns are going to be relevant? Well, anything that could, help us, maybe approximate party identification would be really helpful. And I think there's still a lot of experimentation about how good these consumer items are. One of the other limitations on the consumer data is that we don't have it for everyone. When I say, we're taking this data and merging it onto the main voter file of 800,000 cases and maybe 500,000 households, we don't have an observation for the particular consumer preference. We don't have an observation for all of those people. We'll have it, maybe in the best of circumstances, 20% of the file covered, 25%. All right, so that means there's still an enormous amount of missing data. All right, and so there's some real caveats that have to go into this kind of analysis. And that's the stuff that that isn't written up in the journalistic accounts, which are all rah.
You said the use of big data just has a marginal difference in the campaign.
Yeah.
What are some examples of the most effective tactical uses of this data?
Well, I think one of the things that campaigns are trying to do tactically is target voters with messaging, say, more precisely than they could otherwise. So, if for example, that someone is not only Asian American, but they're of Thai ancestry, okay? It's possible, for instance, that you could send to that household something not only in English, but in Thai as well, okay? And that possibly could have an impact. It is possible, particularly with Asian surnames, for instance, to identify within, reasonable range of error, what the ancestry of the Asian surname is. Now, with some cases, the name's too common, all right, or it's common across 2 or 3 Asian nationality groups. And so there you have to couple that information with census data on who actually lives in that particular precinct. Okay, that it might be, that these Chos happen to be Korean, the Chos over here are Chinese background. Okay, kind of thing like that. So, I think if we're, targeting certain kinds of ethnic and minority groups, it can be helpful because those groups care a lot about identity politics, or potentially so. I think it's also possible, that if you discover that, somebody really likes LL Bean and Cabela's and owns guns, that targeting them with a message about Second Amendment rights, might be an effective thing to do. So knowing that they, have shopping preferences, consumer preferences that do line up to send a clear political signal, can be helpful. But as I said, there are lots of instances, where you have consumer information, but it doesn't, at least not yet, send a clear political signal. We haven't discovered that it does anyway. And so that's, where, maybe big data is more hype than a value over a practical value. So much of, the micro-targeting depends upon brands and these consumption preferences having political content, having political meaning. Okay, and I can sit here and say, Whole Foods, yes, and Hobby Lobby, probably. Okay, and Chick-fil-A, yeah, probably. Birkenstocks, oh yeah. All right. But there are still, there's a limit, right? There's still a lot of brands and products whose political meaning is not clear, and Prius may be one of those that's kind of blurred. The longer a brand is around and the more it saturates the market, sometimes the less pungent the political meaning. It used to be that Starbucks was synonymous with liberal upper income. Well, now that Starbucks are sort of ubiquitous across the landscape, I don't think that meaning's there anymore. Just like Walmart, used to be pretty much synonymous with rural and redneck, right? And certainly those are the origins of Walmart. But now, 30 or 40 years into this incredible expansion they've undertaken, Walmarts are showing up in a lot of big cities and in urban areas, and they're responsible for revitalizing older neighborhoods in urban areas. Like the worst parts of Washington, D.C., you're seeing Walmarts spring up. And so, that association we've always had, of Walmart being this kind of Republican piece of iconography, it's not as clear as it used to be. So these things do undergo some change. Just as some brands, will emerge and make a political meaning that they didn't have before. Some of my students, have clued me in that, Subaru is beginning to, take on some meanings that, maybe years ago it didn't have. So IKEA, same thing, and it's, it's a lot of this is in the way, they choose to present themselves in their advertising.
All right, I think that's great. Thank you very, very much.